What's going on, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Bryan and myself are going to have a conversation around the recent pre-publish release from Zach, Josh, the data-driven strength guys, and the rest of the research team that helped them on their new, let's call it a pre-publication, like I just said, titled How Close to Failure Should We Train? So this is a really, really cool new research project out of them, where they basically took a lot of the existing research that has been put out, and they did a bunch of fancy research or statistical analysis, meta-regression sort of thing, to put out a really beefy kind of report on it. And it has some interesting findings that I would say are more interesting from my standpoint, based on just what the current body of literature tends to suggest, not what my personal anecdotal kind of findings with myself and clients suggest. So we're just going to have an open conversation about it. Before we get into that, as always, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, that was a beefy intro, much like this document that we tried to peruse before this episode. Updates this week. Decent amount going on here. I'll try and be as quick as I can. So there is a new cycle on Bryan's program. That's my program, for anyone that may not know. It's offered on the Train Heroic app as part of my Paragon Training Methods programming. And so my new cycle is going to start on June 4th. We have just completed 2 mesocycles of 6 weeks each that are 9 days per microcycle. So basically 108 days that I've spent on the current program, and I am feeling a bit ready to switch things up a little bit. And so where the prior program was kind of like a delt and quad specialization cycle, there were 2 specific days that really targeted delts, and actually 3 days that targeted delts and 2 days that hit quads pretty thoroughly. This new cycle is going to be much more well-rounded. And so I just want to quickly go over the split and some of the kind of cool features of it as my first update here. And so where is that little document that I created for myself? So the split is now 4 training days a week. You guys know I don't often like to train on a calendar week. Aaron and I have discussed this before. But in this cycle, it actually is going to be laid out as 4 training sessions over a 7-day week. However, I think for me personally, it is probably likely that I will be doing this over 8 days for a couple different reasons, but primarily because I am going really hard in the paint on cardio this cycle. Not to say that this is something that everybody following my program needs to do, but I am really trying to push the boundaries of how much cardio I can do and still recover / progress in the weight room. And I'm kind of doing this as a little bit of an N of 1 experiment, because we've seen this kind of change in the literature and concurrent training. And I mentioned in prior episodes, like my discussion with Mike T. Nelson that we talked about last week, and this idea of having something that's your 1A and your 1B. And I don't want to make my cardio 1A and say I'm now putting my weights on the back burner. I just want to try to make both of them my 1A, and we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe, I end up burning out and I end up backsliding. And if I do, then I know kind of where the limit is, and I can pull back in subsequent iterations from there. But essentially, this cycle, my intention is to train 4 days throughout the 7 or 8 day period with weights, and have 6 cardio sessions. And so I'm going to have 4 zone 2 sessions. And these are my more recuperative, for some people, their go out and walk 10K steps can get you into zone 2. For people that are in better shape, you need to work a little bit harder. But for me, I really do find the zone 2 sessions recuperative, and I don't find that they take any toll on my weight training. At least that's what I've found over the last 6 weeks. So I have, or 6 months rather. So I have the 4 zone 2 sessions. I have 1 that's going to be more of like a VO2 max interval based type session. These are going to be more of like a 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off repeats, which is just hell. It's like the worst thing in the world. And then 1 day that's, I call it ride with friends. And it's basically whatever cardio you feel like. basically whatever cardio you feel like you want to do on a Sunday. So that's your Sunday workout. And it could be like a hike, it could be a long bike ride. There's no specific zone structure or anything like that. It's just kind of go out, be a kid, go explore, adventure, and have fun. So, like I said, I don't really expect people following my program to do 6 cardio sessions a week on top of 4 weight training sessions. That's just what I'm going to do as I'm kind of going through this N of 1 experiment. As far as the training program itself, you guys know I don't like to often use normal splits like push-pull legs or upper lower or whatever. I like to be unique for whatever reason. So Monday we have hamstrings and lateral delts as the main focus, and leg extensions as a way to target the quads on that hamstring dominant day. Tuesday is our zone 5 VO2 max intervals. Wednesday we have upper body pulling with triceps. And then I put push-ups on that day too, so that you get a little bit of chest stimulus. Thursday is either zone 2 or kind of a rest day, walk 10,000 steps type idea, basically chill. Friday is a quads and lateral delts day with leg curls. So this is the opposite of my Monday day, which is hamstrings, lateral delts, and leg extensions. This is quads, lateral delts, and leg curls. So we're hitting legs twice a week in this manner. And then the final day on Saturday is upper body push with biceps, and then I put pull-ups in there so that you get a little bit of back. And so essentially what we're doing with that structure is having one primary day where 70 to 80% of the volume for the week will exist for that muscle group, and then there'll be a smaller amount of volume on a second day. For example, the pull-ups for the back, the push-ups for the chest, the leg curls or the leg extensions for the hamstrings and quads, respectively. And so that cycle is starting on June 4th. That's actually a Sunday. So just take all the days that I just said, Monday through Saturday, and just move them back a day. The cycle is actually going to go Sunday through Saturday. But anyways, that is the general idea. And so, I think it'll be a super fun cycle. I'm actually going to be incorporating 3 movements that are going to use the quote Milo Wolf approach to lengthened partials. So the difference just quickly being that when I do lengthened partials, I generally will go to failure and then we'll do partials after failure type idea. The way Milo tends to do them, and we've had some discussions off air about this, and he doesn't like fully approve of my way of doing it. But I've, pushed back a little bit on that, and we've had some good rapport back and forth about it. But his way of doing lengthened partials is essentially to establish a predetermined range of motion and then just go to that range of motion every time. So say 60% of the range of motion is what you establish, then that is just kind of determined as your full range of motion, and therefore you can use RIR. You can obviously stop shy of failure using RIR. That's the same thing. But the cool thing about this approach that he's using is that you can use RIR, whereas when you're using my approach, it's usually pass failure. And I think that this new meta regression that we're going to talk about today actually provides some substantial rationale for the way that I have been doing my partials versus the way that Milo does them. So I think there's probably, rationale for both ways. But this cycle will be including that approach to partials for 3 of the movements: leg extensions, tricep cross cable pushdowns, and 45-degree hip extensions. So anyway, that is the basic intro to my new cycle starting on June 4th. And I have a couple other faster updates that I will get to here in a second. But let's kick it over to Aaron for some thoughts.
My main question, the zone 2 sessions that are 6 of them over the week.
Four zone 2 sessions, 6 total cardio sessions.
Okay. When you said like the 6 zone 2 sessions, I was like, God damn, that is a lot.
6 total cardio sessions, but yeah.
Still a lot.
Yeah.
For the zone 2, am I correct that you are doing those on your bike outside?
Correct, for the most part. On days where it's raining or I can't get outside, I'll do a Peloton, which I've actually done more recently, which has been interesting because the Peloton allows you to see wattage, which I don't get on my bike until I get a power meter, which I am entertaining the idea of getting a power meter. $1,000 is a large commitment, but I am considering it. But the Peloton has been cool because it gives me like since I don't do it very often, I'm able to see progress manifested sort of when I do go out onto the Peloton. But yeah, the majority of the sessions are going to be outside on my bike.
Gotcha. I think that's like the real differentiator. When you said that, I was like trying to picture myself, and I'm like, because zone two. So how? I guess the next question is, how long are your zone two sessions? Like approximately.
Always under an hour, or most of the time under an hour. Usually 45 to 50 minutes.
Okay, that was my assumption. I was assuming like 40 to 60 minutes,
Yeah.
and I was like, dude, there's no way in hell I'm just gonna sit there for. You could give me like I'd need something really, really good. Back in Bali, like Jackson put like a stationary bike in his like living room, and he'll like just watch like anime or something like that on his like
Yeah.
normal TV. I'm like that I could do, but like on my phone trying to make it work like in the gym, I'm like there's just no way. I'd get to
Yeah.
like maybe 17, 18 minutes, and I'm like I'm out of here. Specifically because with zone two, like not a lot changes. When I'm doing my like hit bike sprints, like there's a lot of things changing every literally like 30 to 90 seconds. So there's like that, I guess, kind of like mental things taking up like your mental capacity. But okay, that is, I'm interested to see the findings over this coming cycle for you.
Yeah.
I guess, feel free to share my insight. Is I do honestly think that you will recover quite well. I think it's like the things we're going to talk about in today's episode. I think a lot of things are kind of approached from like a not necessarily pessimistic, but from like the glass is half empty as opposed to like the glass is half full sort of thing. Like when you take care of your body, when you're putting really high quality food in and fueling yourself, I think the recovery capacity and stuff is quite higher than many people give themselves credit for.
Yeah. And I really just like the zone two stuff. It just isn't fatiguing. Like I really finished these sessions feeling like invigorated and like all positive qualities that result from it. And so certainly I expect the other two cardio sessions, the longer ride with friends and then the kind of VO2 max intervals, I expect those to suck and to have like a little bit of fatigue debt. But I definitely don't expect that from the zone two, and that's not what I've experienced since doing them. So I think more than anything, they're just a tool to help me prepare for the 50-mile bike ride that I'm doing, but also just help all the health markers of life along the way. Which leads me into my second update here, which is I mentioned a while ago, I think post our blood work episode, so maybe 2 months ago, that there was a guy who follows Evolved, who's also an MD, and he's an ATIA ascriber, Peter Attia, and kind of follows a lot of those theories. And he's in the process of looking to open up his own clinic, kind of like Attia has done. And so I've been communicating with him a bunch on email back and forth. And he just yesterday sent in a whole ton of blood tests for me to get done. Some of them that I've done prior on the life extension panels that you've suggested I've done. And so I did a thorough life extension panel in February, which is what stimulated us to do that blood work episode, I think in February or early March, whatever it was. And there were a number of tests that we either A, wanted to repeat after a washout period, or B, tests that I just have never done before. And so specifically, one of the things that I find amazing that I never knew this, and I probably should have intuitively, I almost feel silly for not, but the idea of taking time off of working out before taking a blood test, I have never done this.
Have we
And
never talked about that?
I don't think it's ever come up.
I have failed you, Brian. I apologize. Yeah, every single one of my clients, it's at least 24 hours. If there's someone who's training like very intensely, or we have a lot riding on that blood work, it's at least 48 to 72 hours. Yeah, my bad, dude. I dropped
No,
the ball
you're
there.
you're cool. I just like I now feel like all of those liver and kidney markers that I'm seeing that I am concerned about because of their elevation. I now just wonder whether that's because I've always trained the day before taking a blood test and not even thought twice about it.
Very likely.
Yeah. So this time around, I'm going to take 72 hours off of lifting, and I'm going to do my best not to do intense cardio. The doc and I kind of discussed that I could probably do zone two, but it would be better if I probably just walked 10K steps a day and didn't do any sort of anything even zone 2-ish. So I'm planning this week. This is my deload week before the new cycle starts on June 4th. So I am intending on taking a few days off, just walking and really trying to get like a more clarity on some of the blood work stuff. And then some of the other blood test panel stuff that I have not had done before, just because I think you and the listeners may find this interesting. I just want to run down this list because some of it's specific to me, but some of it's just, I think, good stuff to have in general. So we're getting HDL, triglycerides, ApoB. I've already done ApoB, and obviously triglycerides and HDL are part of my normal blood panel. Homocysteine, I've never had before. CRP, I've had that plenty of times. My CRP is pretty good. LP little a, I've never had, so we're adding that one. We're getting omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. I've never had that one before. Uric acid I've had before, but never after time off, so curious on that. C-statin C is a new one that I'm getting for kidney function because it is not specific to like the GFR and the BUN ratios that we tend to look at on normal weight loss panels. Estradiol, FSH, LH, T3, T4, those are all pretty standard ones. Free T3, free T4, TSH, reverse T3. Those are all standard ones that I usually get, but again, not before time off. CBC, hemoglobin A1C, also get those. Beta cell function, can't say I've had that one before. Vitamin D panel, had that one. ApoE, I've never had ApoE, and I'm actually a little nervous about this because this is the one that tells you how many alleles you have that may put you at risk for dementia later in life. So most people are ApoE3, which is basically neutral. But if you have an ApoE4, then you're more likely to get dementia. If you have an ApoE2, then you're less likely to get dementia. It's protective. So that one will be interesting. And then a full testosterone panel, including albumin and SHBG. So that is kind of the stuff we're doing. And I have had a washout period as well for the last 6 weeks on creatine because my kidney function was one of the things that really alerted two of the people I talked to. And it didn't seem to matter that I am a weightlifter and that I take creatine. They were still like, wow, these numbers are way too high. So I'm taking a washout period from creatine. I haven't done that for 6 weeks. And that's partially why we're doing the C-statin C, which I believe is unaffected by the creatine. Yeah. So any thoughts on any of that?
The cystatin C is a great one because from my understanding, which is limited on it, it's like an independent marker. It's like an enzyme, I believe, produced by the liver when there is like kind of damage, or sorry, not the liver, the kidneys, when there is essentially damage or concern going on, like leading towards damage. So that would be a great one. The ApoE, was it?
ApoE,
that one,
the dementia one?
Yeah, that one I think is, I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of potentially scary depending on how you look at it, but it could be like, okay, maybe I have a higher than average, risk for this potential dementia down the line. There's a lot you can start doing, right? I mean, there's a lot of good research there, especially around like, lion's mane and things like that. Like there's certain supplements that you could be like, hey, I'm 40. I'm going to start putting these in pretty much year round to kind of stack the odds in my favor. Because I know this, right? Information is, there's a saying, right? Information or knowledge, right? Knowledge is power. Yeah. So I think just being proactive, especially like we've talked about, health span is so important to you to, take action early.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. So the ApoE one also, like if then you can basically just decide that, hey, I'm no longer going to drink alcohol because even like one drink a week seems to have negative implications on dementia. So that would be like one thing that I would probably change. But aside from that, it's like exercise, eat well, sleep well, like basically all the things that I'm already trying to do. So yeah, those are my two major updates. And then I have two really quick small updates. A new episode of the LBLB podcast. That's the one I do with Lori and Alex Macklin, this Paragon Training Methods podcast. I'm on a new episode of that one coming out Wednesday. And we're basically going over just common things that people should know in the gym. So basic things like proximity to failure and other things like that. But anyways, that'll be out on Wednesday. And then I was on the Brains and Gains podcast recently with Dave McConey, and it was a thorough review of our thoughts on the Peter Attia book. So he and I had both finished it recently, And so we got together on the podcast and kind of talked about some of that and some of the implications that that may have on our training and our life and stuff like that. So that's all I got on updates, and I'll kick it over to you, bud.
I have two updates. One is kind of funny, and one is a big kind of realization for me. So there's this kind of common thought that I have, and this is pretty much it's probably a bias of being so knee deep in this world, that like at this age, like people know these things. You know, when I'm thinking about putting out a post about like using full range of motion and things like that, I'm on the back of my head, I'm like, people already know this, right? I don't want to just like put it out just to make it sort of thing. But I think that is a bit of a bias of like, I have conversations with people like you know what I mean? Like my significant, like everything in my world, my environment is, nutrition, training, that sort of thing. And it's taken is me, spending some time back in like a very, what I'll consider like a rural gym here, with younger people. There's a group of bros in there that are probably, here's the thing, I'm not sure, they could be 25, they could be fucking 17. I'm not really sure at this point in my life, but they're younger bros based on the conversations and stuff that they're having, and watching them train. I'm like, it's literally like it's 2003 and I'm, whatever, 17 years old again. Nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. And it's like reaffirmed to me that I'm fighting the good fight, right? There's still a lot of people that need this information. They're doing like, I don't know, a push day, I guess, yesterday. And I'm watching them. They're on the incline, barbell bench, and they're loading up like a good amount of weight. I think they had like 205 on there. And I'm like, damn, like that's like what I would be using on there for like, a set of 8 to 12 or something like that. And then I watch them, and it is a partial range of motion lift at the top. That bar is a foot off their chest still. And that's like the 4 reps. And I was like, my God, have we learned nothing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was quite funny. And the conversations, right? Jenny's generally a very one who doesn't want to put headphones in the gym, but she's like, I need to put headphones in. Like, I can't listen to these conversations anymore. And the one guy is just talking about like training 7 days a week, but doing doubles each day. And he's like, I'm going to train shoulders in the morning and then come back and train shoulders in the evening. And like, just, they're just so much to learn still. So I was like, okay, right. There's people still need this, maybe getting things to some of the people that need it, but it was just funny. Of hindsight, because I mean, I used to do that shit. I would train, and then we had a little gym in the basement, and I would go home and literally train the exact same. I'd go home, eat, and then go back in the basement and keep training the exact same things I just trained. So it was just quite comical.
Something I think about a lot actually with social media too is like I don't want to put out that like basic B information because I feel like my followers are just not going to be interested in it. But I think to your point, like a lot of that is biased based on who we surround ourselves with and who comments on your posts. And so like I have 20,000 followers. If I put something out and I get 100 comments of people that are engaging about a topic as in depth as length and partials or range of motion, then my assumption becomes my followers understand range of motion and length and partials and why we're doing it and all this stuff. But then I only just need to either go to a gym like you did or go into my like DM requests. And there's like people being like, why are you performing half reps? And I'm like, like, don't you know anything, So yeah, I mean, I'm sure that information definitely can be helpful to a large portion of our following. I still am so hesitant because I feel like a lot of my followers are going to look at that and be like, oh, why is this like obviously I know that, like train in the 8 to 12 rep range for hypertrophy. And then you have the people that are like, yeah, bro, that's what you're supposed to do. That everyone knows that. And then there's the people like, well, actually you could do 6 to 30. And it's like, no matter what you put out, you're going to have people on both sides of the equation that are going to be either helped by it or hindered by it, I guess, or not helped by it.
Yeah, I agree there. And then the last one, and this one, man, this one's really hard for me. So I'm wrapping up I essentially have like today's Tuesday. By the time Sunday night hits, I'll be back in Bali. I have a couple days in Hong Kong by myself, but wrapping up like essentially a month-long trip away. And I have effectively made zero progress on my own like personal, nutrition and kind of fitness goals. And I'm in a bulking phase. And it's been frustrating, but ultimately, like, I just realized when you are chasing the last kind of 5% or optimality, 80 to 90% effort just doesn't move the needle anymore. And I have great days, but then like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's like my family was in town, so like hanging out with them, not training, catering meals that are still very high quality meals, but just like not being able to eat my 6 meals per day and all my protein feedings and everything. My weights just continued to slide. I've hovered in the 208 to 210 for the entirety since we've been back. Suboptimal training sort of thing, even with trying to line it up. And it's just like, it's been very kind of frustrating, but eye-opening that like at this point in my, personal kind of lifting and physique journey, unless I can like really be on it, it just doesn't cut it to move the needle anymore. And I think that has really kind of changed my outlook on traveling in those sorts of things for the rest of the year.
So do you think that's mostly a product of just being out of your routine? And so it's not a product of you being in Bali per se, but it's a matter of you being like somewhere that's home.
Yeah. I mean, like if I went, like if I took a month-long trip, like directly to the lake, where I am here in Virginia, where I have the grocery store, I know the gym, like I think I can make that work. But just some like travel days, variables, family type stuff, or traveling to see friends, there's just too many non-perfect days to continue inching, the needle forward. And that's with like, and I'm sure someone's listening to that, like, yeah, you could just eat a bunch of food and of course you're going to gain weight, but like that's the difference between, gaining the weight you want in a gaining phase and just getting fat. Like I could of course have a 200 carbs with breakfast and then, another 250 carbs with dinner, but you're not going to partition that the way that you want to,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Well, maybe you would be a great candidate to travel while you're dieting because you tend to lose weight when you're not pushing, food consistently. So maybe it just becomes like almost a tool for you to be like, well, I'm in a dieting phase. I'm just going to go travel. I won't be able to get all my food, but I'll still get all my protein. Like it kind of almost makes the process, even if not just as easy, like, I mean, if not easier than just as easy.
That was my kind of thought. Like I could easily protein shake in the morning, another
Yeah.
one later, and then have like kind of two more reserved meals. And my superpower is the with dieting is where the majority of people struggle, like social situations, work events where you're expected to like socialize and have alcohol and stuff. Like I have zero problems being like, yeah, I'm not
That's
fucking
not my
coming because I
thing.
don't want
Yeah.
to eat that.
Yeah.
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 So yeah, that was my thought exactly.
Cool. Sweet. Well, I think that's all we got on updates.
Yeah. So let's dive in. The and I should actually preface this with this one. It's interesting to me because admittedly, this is confirmation bias for me. I've had conversations with some clients where I'm like, hey, listen, what you are getting is not supported by research. This is Aaron's kind of anecdotal perspective. Feel free to shoot me down or whatever peers I've had clients with, but I guess ultimately, what I would like to open this with, and what ultimately we will, that my, I guess, firmest standpoint on it is I have found very, very few aspects of life from a massive, perspective where less effort is generally more productive than more effort. Like if you try as hard as you can at things, in an overwhelming majority of aspects, it generally produces better results. From this, which I think something that is kind of quite clear, strength appears to be one of those that does not actually. But hypertrophy, which is what the majority of the conversation you and I have on this podcast, does seem to fall into that umbrella.
Yeah, and it's confirmation bias for me too. I agree completely. It is interesting. I mean, not surprising, but it is interesting that the data on this meta regression is kind of validating things that we have found just in general through our own training and through programming for others and stuff like that. I mean, it's been well established, it seems, for decades almost, that you don't need to train close to failure for strength. And I think the logical rationale makes sense too, right? Like if you're doing strength work close to failure, then your rep speed is slowing down, your velocity of the concentric is slowing down, and so you're losing explosiveness and force production, which are going to correlate super well into strength. And when you're working closer in proximity to failure for strength work, or I guess in general, you're inevitably going to incorporate some compensatory mechanisms. And so in strength, you definitely don't want that, because you want to be reinforcing a movement pattern that is the optimal objective. It'd be like if you were trying to do like a 1 rep max vertical jump, but you were somehow messing your technique up and doing it suboptimally. When you're doing strength work, you want to perform every single rep as optimally as you possibly can, so that you're reinforcing the force production through that specific movement pattern. And so to me, the strength side was no surprise at all. When it came to the hypertrophy side, there's been so much recently in the literature, and you can go, when I say recent, I mean the last 7-8 years probably, but you can just look back to like when I first came out of CrossFit and I fell into the RP, Renaissance periodization approach to training, where at the time Mike Israetel was, I mean, he was just following the research. He couldn't exactly know better, aside from maybe anecdote and understanding that like, hey, the research isn't necessarily in line with what I've experienced, but like he was following the research. And there was the Brad Schoenfeld meta-analysis that 45 sets was better than 27, which was better than 9, which is just crazy on so many levels. But there was that, and there was a lot of research basically saying that don't have to train to failure, and you probably shouldn't train to failure. But I think the thing that is often missed as this research has progressed in the years since it first came out is that there just kept being this repeated statement that you'd hear of like, why would you train to failure when you can get just as good results not training to failure? And the thing that people forget is that you have to do more volume for that equation to work out. And people just like, somehow that just got lost in translation over the course of years. And so I'll literally have conversations with people in the comments, in my DMs or on email or whatever, that are literally saying that exact same thing. And I'm like, yes, but you are going to have to do 4 to 5 sets of an exercise instead of 2 sets, because you want to keep 3 reps in reserve on each set. And so now we have this opportunity cost associated, right? The opportunity cost of time, the opportunity cost of, man, I call them, Zach actually coined this term, but the amount of unracks. And so unracks is a term that's often referred to like deadlifts or back squats, like you're having to unrack the bar, and like, but it's an analogy for having to psychologically, mentally focus and bring it to each set. And so an unrack could be like a set of T-bar rows too. Like it doesn't really matter, but to have to go in there and mentally focus and get in the zone for 4 to 5 sets instead of just having to do it twice, it just, for me, it never made sense, because I could do an additional 2 reps in that one set, or I could stop 2 reps shy, but have to do that 4 more times. And like, by the time you've gotten to the point where you're 2 or 3 reps shy of failure, you've already worked really hard. So an additional 10 or 15 seconds of time for you to commit in there to get more out of your set. It always seemed, at least for me, to be a better ROI, opportunity cost or whatever. So yeah, curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, I agree with completely. There's like and I don't want to borrow like too much from the Chris Beardsley kind of principles with like Henneman's size principle, which essentially states that we have you have motor units that control different varying sizes of muscle fibers,
Mm-hmm.
and that like you're going to use your small motor units first when you're doing like your lighter reps or non as challenging reps, and then as the reps get more and more challenging and you have to put in more and more effort, you recruit the larger and larger motor units until you eventually pull on like the largest motor unit you have to put is to pull recruit as many fibers as, your physiology has within that muscle to move that load. And that is where, the most effective hypertrophy comes from. If you're doing like your 5 sets and you're getting to like whatever 70% of that motor unit recruitment, like you're gonna set 3, you go back, you like have to work through the small ones again, then into the medium ones. Set 4, you're working through the small ones again to get into the medium ones. And so, as opposed to if you do like 2 kind of all out balls to the wall sets and you're only kind of working through those progressions to get to what ultimately is going to be the most, beneficial, is using those very large ones. And again, coming back to what I opened with, using a maximal effort is what seems to be most hypertrophic for the majority.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And then on the point of the Henneman size principle, one of the interesting and, again, not surprising pieces of this meta-regression that I took away from it is the idea that if you're picking a heavier weight for hypertrophy, say like a set of 6 to 8 reps, you're essentially recruiting all of those big motor units from the very beginning. So when you look at that meta-regression, there was actually much more rationale and justification for stopping somewhat shy of failure if you're doing, these low rep 5 to 8 rep sets of movements, because from the get-go, your body is having to recruit all of the motor units. But essentially, as you get into the further or higher reps, it becomes more and more important for you to go to the point of failure or get closer to failure to get the full result. And then that also, comes with the ambiguity of, are you actually at failure when you're doing higher reps? Because I know, I've been training 25 years and there's still times where I'm doing a set of 20 rep leg extensions or something. And I'm like, am I really at failure, or does this just burn so bad that I just really, really, really want to stop, And so this is like another reason why I personally love the 5 to 10 rep range for so many things, because you can more accurately assess your RIR. You can get more without having to go all the way to failure, or you can just go all the way to failure and you're going to be more accurate doing it. And then when you're doing the high rep sets, like Aaron said, you're having to go through all of these ineffective reps, if you want to say that, non-stimulative reps, to get to the reps that are actually going to matter and move the needle. So I thought that was kind of an interesting caveat or piece there as well.
Yeah, the thing that you said was the ambiguity of failure as reps get higher, because you effectively have your mind, right? Like for example, like yesterday I have some cable upright rows, right? And then I have like a run the stack kind of set, drop set essentially. Your brain is screaming at you, just like put the weight down, put the weight down, put the weight down, right? Just quit it. But you can still perform those reps, but it just feels horrendous, right? Like the metabolite buildup and everything. And it is when as reps get higher, it introduces the I guess the human limiting factor of the brain into discomfort. Whereas if you're training in like a 6 to 8 or whatever, it's like, I'm giving it all I got. It doesn't really burn, but the weight's just not moving, sort of thing. As it's, more closer to what we could say is like a strength sort of range.
Yeah, but still hypertrophic.
Yes.
Yeah, so to your point of the higher rep stuff, one of the things that I find really bothersome about higher reps is that like I can be performing the reps in a certain manner. So call it like that confident press on the gas pedal. So we're not trying to like explode and like floor it like Gone in 60 Seconds style. We're just confidently pressing on the gas pedal, right? But when you get up to those, say you get to 18 reps of upright rows and you're confidently pressing the gas pedal, well, now your rep speed is starting to slow down. However, if you just decide like, well, now I'm going to start exploding from the bottom, and I'm not talking about using momentum or anything like that. I'm just saying you initiate your reps slightly differently than you were before. Suddenly there's no more slow rep speed. You're just like back to having zero. You're back to like the start of the set, So the precision and the manner in which you perform the reps also is more critical as the reps get higher. Whereas, like you were saying, when they're lower reps, you're giving it everything you have from the beginning. And even if you were doing a confident press on the gas pedal on the hack squat, and then you get tired and you're like, this rep, I'm going to explode up. It's like, not really much changes. You're still kind of working as hard as you can. So I think it's kind of like a safety net as well when you're training in those lower rep ranges. It just mitigates the likelihood that you might be not working hard enough.
Yeah, I agree there. I want to kind of steer the conversation a little bit back towards some of the findings from the meta regression, and something that I think is really, at first when I read it, I was like, okay, I mean, so basically the term nonlinear, right, it is used in the title or the description of it. And it really takes the main graph that they kind of put in the Instagram post and sort of thing to really identify that, because it does appear that as you get into sub RIR, sub-zero RIR, which would be like intensity techniques, taken to act, or what they, I guess, let me back up. One thing that I pulled out of the meta regression that I really liked is they made clear categorizations of how they would kind of group the studies and effectively weight them. And then I'll just actually read what I have here. So they basically assigned an RIR of -1 to the sets where people were taken, to actual concentric failure, or, momentary muscular failure, or you actually failed to achieve the next rep. This is different than hey, I just grinded that last rep of the leg press out. I know I don't have another one left. That would be an RIR of 0. The example of, hey, I know I don't have another one left, I'm going to try anyway, they would put that as an RIR of -1, right? The interesting thing to me is it seems that with that kind of -1, or things taken essentially past failure, the line kind of hockey sticks at the end, where it appears that you get more hypertrophy, appears, right? I'm trying to make sure I'm not speaking conclusively here. It appears that your hypertrophy, upticks as failure and past failure, which would effectively be intensity techniques and sort of things are applied.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's such a really good point. I'm actually curious though, anecdotally, how often are you actually going to -1 RIR? I know when I train and I say I'm going to 0 RIR, I'm almost always completing a rep and feeling like there's very little chance that I would be able to complete the next one. And I feel confident in that after this many years of training. But very rarely, especially on compound movements, am I going to try another rep afterwards. Whereas I think it's different on a movement where you're going into partials, because then you know that you failed and then you try another one and it's just a partial rep, and then you try another and it's another partial. So you're in those ones, you're going to -6 or -7 or whatever the denotation would be. But yeah, for compound movements, how often do you actually make a rep, think it's 0, and then go down and attempt another one?
For compounds, very rarely.
Yeah.
And that's what the next point I was going to kind of bring it into is, when we have these, meta regression studies and those sorts of things. I think, as with so many things, it's difficult, and then interpreting it is difficult, and many people kind of drop the ball there. And one thing that I wanted to really make sure we brought up is there's a time and a place, right? So when I'm doing any lateral delt movement sort of thing, is 90% of the time is going to be, I don't think I got another rep, but I'm going to try, and then I'm going to move into partials. For body parts that I purposefully do lower volume on, biceps and triceps, everything is taken to failure and then past failure, because I'm like, this week I may only do 2 sets of biceps, so I'm going to make sure that I give them 110%, including partials, etc., etc. When I'm doing a hip hinge, aside from the 45-degree hip extension, I'm not really, if I don't think I have another one, RDLs maybe, because I do feel that's a grindy movement that I'll surprise myself with sometimes. But a hack squat and those sort of things, I'm not taking to concentric failure. mostly because I don't train with anyone and I don't want to get pinned under something. But and I also think like that is where your injury risk would also hockey stick.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good point on the hip extension compared to the RDL. And I think that that goes back to the idea of movements being either lengthened overloaded or short overloaded. And when you look at lengthened overload movements, they kind of fall in two buckets. You have like the RDL, so like a deadlift type movement or a hack squat, any type of back squat type movement. But then you also have your lengthened movements that are like your overhead tricep extension or your face away cable curl or something like that. And so the risk associated with trying an extra overhead tricep extension, if you're not sure you're going to make it, is basically negligible. You're just going to like try to get up and nothing's going to happen, right? But when you're doing that, like you said, with a hack squat or an RDL or something, there actually is a risk associated due to all the different muscle groups that are involved in there. And so that goes back to that compound versus isolation thing. So the tricep extension and the face away curl are lengthened, but they're an isolation movement. So we're only working at one joint versus when you try another RDL after you don't think you can make another one, there's so many joints at action in there that there could be these like little small compensatory mechanisms that take place that could potentially lead to tweaking your low back or, getting out of position in some way. So yeah, I think that separating those movements into buckets and looking at it that way is important because when I'm doing my face away curls or my tricep extensions, if I take a set to failure, it's very likely I'm going to go down and try another rep just to not, if not even to test myself, so to speak, because I kind of know that I'm not going to make the rep. It's just like, hey, there might be a little extra stimulus down there if I try another rep or two. And so that's kind of the approach I take on those.
Yeah, that's very, very well said because the term you use there is like, hey, there might be extra stimulus there. And for something like the bicep, curl, the overhead tricep extension, that magnitude is it's quite small because it's localized to a smaller muscle group sort of thing. But I think moving to that application towards the larger body parts, right? The glutes, the hamstrings, the quads, chest and back sort of thing. Many of us, right, because they're larger body parts, they're more compounds, they're more fatiguing, and then you put that kind of mental fear of failure and that risk sort of thing in the human nature is to cut further from failure as opposed to actual failure because of that kind of fear. And thus with that, the meta regression is essentially saying like there is a stimulus being left on the table. Something that I think in the future will come out more as, we're still, this sort of RIR, to failure research is what I would consider like maybe just breaking out of its infancy, especially in objectively quantifying, and I shouldn't say quantifying, objectively placing the correct labeling, of failure. Are we talking volitional failure, concentric failure, momentary muscular failure? As we get firmer there, I think we will, well, obviously this is a quite general statement, get better research in the future, but that's pretty much could be said across any research over history. But I think that is one thing is of actually defining it, because there's been so many small, obviously not very controlled social media, experiments and such, where you say like, hey, what is this RIR watching, someone do something. You're like, I think they got like 2 reps left, and they'll have like 6,
Yeah.
and even yourself and myself, who are, quite trained, very competent with RIR. I get it wrong. I'd say I get it wrong more than 50% of the time, with myself. And that's trying every single day, like week in and week out for years on end. So I think kind of saying like, as it progresses, I do think we will get better research out of it, which will only kind of, I guess, further confirm what we're effectively agreeing with the data-driven strength guys here on hypertrophy.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I ever get it wrong at 0 RIR. I mean, maybe there's like an occasional time here and there, but I feel like I've pretty much nailed 0 RIR on almost all my movements at this point, because maybe especially because I do tend to go into partials after failure a lot. But the further you are from failure, the more ambiguity exists for sure. And then I also think it's probably important to note that, like you said, you were talking about the compound movements and that there is something, some gains being left on the table, stopping shy of failure. But I think that it's also important to remember, at least for practicality, that most of these compound lengthened movements are being performed in the lower rep ranges. And so I think it's arguable how much stimulus is being left on the table if you're stopping a set of hack squats at 6 reps at 1 RIR versus really actually going down and attempting / making that 7th rep at 0 RIR. Like we opened the show talking about how with those lower rep ranges, and then as we know from research, with the more demanding movements where compensation can occur more easily, I don't think there's quite as much left on the table. And I would guess that the fatigue cost of that extra rep of a hack squat or an RDL is such that even though there probably is additional stimulus with it, actually, I'm pretty confident there is additional stimulus with it. I think that the fatigue that comes with it is much larger than the fatigue that comes with, that extra rep going to failure on something that's a little bit less demanding.
Regarding the fatigue, I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, the fatigue there is quite massive. One thing that, again, personal opinion here, I'm happy to be wrong about it. I would argue that the chasing that 7th rep in that example for you that you used, what it does to your mindset in applying that to training, I think does have merit of it. Kind of like the example of like, okay, you're in one of those like new video games that every decision you make like changes the decision tree of the video game.
Yeah.
Taking that 7th rep can kind of like unlock a new belief in yourself sort of thing, and then change your subsequent training sessions, which can kind of over time, enough separation, kind of hockey stick your potential, I would say, of your future training sessions.
That's such a really good point, and something that like definitely needed to be said, because if you're somebody that tends to lean towards safety over everything, or fatigue management is like the most important, then you could just be even further from failure than you think you are, and so you would be behooved by trying that rep at times. As far as practical applications, do you want to jump into some of that stuff here? Because I was thinking, like, when it comes to practical applications, I think there's practical application as it relates to partials. But there's also the practical application of there still is benefit to not training to failure, especially in the rep range and the movement that you select. And so if you have a program design that has one set of a movement, then yes, you probably want to take that movement to failure likely. But if you're doing a program that, say, has 3 sets of a movement, and then you're going to go from hack squat for 3 sets to leg extension for 3 sets, and then to, say, split squat for 2 sets. Say that's like your quad day, right? Then I don't know that your benefit is that you're maximizing benefit by taking all 8 of those sets to failure.
Agreed.
I think that, you want to look at the long game a little bit and like, how am I going to get the most out of this workout? And so like, if I was constructing a workout like that and trying to get the most out of that workout, my first set of hack squat would probably be 4 RIR, then maybe 2 RIR for the second set. And then I'd probably go to failure on the third set. Then we'd go into the leg extension. It would probably go 2-1-0 RIR. So across the 3 sets, again, I would have 1 failure set at the end. And then for the split squat, it would probably go 2 RIR and then, 0 or 1 RIR for the second set. And so you're looking at across those 8 sets, not all 8 sets are to failure. You're getting maybe 2 or 3 of those 8 sets to failure, and you're strategically placing them as the last set of the sequence. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when the conversation turns to practicality, right, context becomes so much more important. I think with a training program, that the expectation or conversation around which sets are to failure and what your total volume is on the program or for a given day should needs to be communicated, because that completely changes things. Like if I got that program, right, I would probably modify it to, if I'm being completely honest. And the first thing I thought of, like when you said that, I was like, those split squats, I would only do 1 set. and just take them to failure. Because
Yeah.
I know personally for myself, I don't need, what would that be like? It was 2 sets of split squats, like not so 8 total, 6 or 3 on the first 2, and then another 2. Like I just don't need that much, right? I would be absolutely crushed, and my mental capacity to really like buy in and try and push it would start like would wane very hardcore. So I think like you said, that RIR kind of descending scale that you used is very very appropriate for that. But I think like having that conversation, and then too like other things that come in, times that like let's say you're like, great example, I have a client, 37-year-old mom of 3, her children are all very small, we're back in the gym, like she doesn't need to be trained into failure, she's very stressed out, right? And as good and beneficial as you know resistance training is, it is an additional stressor on the body, and you have like your allostatic stress load has a ceiling, and you don't want to be busting through it or even approaching it all the time, because you'll start to regress. So understanding where the other impacting factors in your life, like even within a person, there's going to be times where you have much more capacity to train to failure. Times when your food intake is higher, you're in a better period with sleep, the other life stressors are lower. It's great to train to failure. If you're working full time, in school full time, and working like night shift and stuff with not great sleep, you might not want to be training to failure all the time. So I think like there's many other external variables that will impact it. And in terms of practicality, like those are quite important factors to consider. But going back to the original point that you brought up, like knowing where failure is supposed to be in the training program, I think is very important. And that's another reason why you probably don't want to be following people's leg days or whatever day on Instagram when it's like incline press, 4 sets of 10, incline flies, 4 sets of 10, right? It's like there's only like 60% of the variables that you need are put forth.
Yeah. I'm not even sure that in that example I provided where we had 8 sets, but say 3 of the 8 were to failure, I'm not so sure that I think that that would be better than just doing 1 set of each of those movements to failure. So, I mean, obviously you would have your warm-up sets and your build-up sets and all that stuff, but you just like 1 hack squat set to failure, 1 leg extension set to failure, 1 split squat set to failure, boom, done. I don't know that doing those 8 sets with like descending RIR or anything like that is necessarily better. But again, to your point, it's very context dependent. So the last thing that I wanted to discuss here is partials and the idea of failure, because as I opened up with, the when I was talking about my programming, Bryan's program in the beginning, the 2 different approaches to partials are, the Milo Wolf way, or the evidence-based way would be, you establish a stopping point, like 60% of range of motion, and then you can use RIR. So you can, be like, I'm going to do my hack squats and I'm going to stop every rep right when I get above parallel, and then descend back down and get above parallel and descend back down. And then in that manner, I can stop my set with 2 RIR, 3 RIR, or I can go to failure, whatever it is. You have some freedom there. And then the other way of approaching them is the past failure way, which is basically, I'm going to go until I fail, and then I'm just going to continue accruing range of motion and let that range of motion kind of drop off rep to rep. And of course, that second style, past failure, is really only applicable on short overload movements. Because if you're going through doing a set of hack squats and you're basically at failure, and then you're like, now I'm going to bang out partials, I mean, you're just going to get pinned at the bottom. Like, you're not going to actually be able to get partials. So in one manner, the way that you do your partials has to be specific to the type of movement that you're doing. But secondarily, now that we have this meta-regression showing the trend for more hypertrophy at or even beyond failure using the -1 RIR designation, I think that in some ways it validates the use of the partials past failure for short overload movements even more. And so when I had this discussion with Milo a little while ago, a month or two or whatever it was, part of his argument as to why I shouldn't be doing partials the way that I do them is that I can't use RIR with them, that I am essentially going past failure. And his argument was, well, you're incurring all of this additional fatigue and you're not getting a reasonable amount of extra stimulus and all that stuff. And so he actually went as far as to say that the way I was doing partials wasn't evidence-based. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way at the time, because yes, he was right. They just haven't studied partials that way. The reason it's evidence-based is because when they study partials, they set a standard range of motion and then they go to that range of motion. But nobody actually has ran a study where you did partials after failure on a short overload movement, or else they would be evidence-based as well. So evidence-based is only based on what you have studied. So that whole argument kind of rubbed me just slightly the wrong way a little bit. In a manner, I feel slightly vindicated now with this, that maybe it validates the past failure partials on short overload movements a little more. And especially when we think about the fact that short overload movements are just lacking total fatigue cost in so many ways. Like you said in the beginning, taking a set of lateral raises and then failing the top position and then just being able to knock out some partials at the bottom. Would we really argue that that's creating a ton of extra fatigue that you somehow can't recover from? Which I think most people in the trenches would say absolutely not. I just think it's important to look at it context dependent, movement dependent, and all of these things. So I don't think in the grand scheme of things that this meta-regression has changed. It's changed almost nothing in the way that I train or program training. But I think that it maybe has slightly changed the way that I communicate this stuff to people, which I think actually circles back to the very beginning where you were talking about this idea of posting on Instagram and people, is this helpful to people or is this not helpful to people? And which of my followers, would it be helpful to and which ones wouldn't be helpful to? And so I think that in some ways, this meta-regression has shown some light on the different avenues by which we can kind of implement training and still find it productive based on context.
The only thing I will add to kind of wrap this one up with the partials like you just described it versus Milo's definition. One is essentially, let's call it an intensity technique. It effectively is, because they're kind of an intensity technique and it's past failure and where you don't have as much control because of we can call it fatigue, but not like central fatigue, but just like a localized fatigue of you just perform something. It's hard to accurately quantify in terms of science, I would say, especially week to week. One day I might do partials on my tricep push downs and get 13 partials. The next mine, I only get 7. To me, I'm dropping pennies in my hypertrophy bucket, whether I got 17 or 13 or 7 or 14 or 7 or whatever I said. But from a research standpoint, that would be quite, problematic. So I think it really comes back to your goal is just getting jacked. You know what I mean? That's what it is. Whereas Milo's is I need to turn this quantification into publication that's very precise and highly kind of safeguarded per se. The goals are just quite kind of stark in the contrast of their differences.
That's such a really good point too. Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective because it's easy in the moment to be well, man, he's using evidence-based for everything, but it's just not evidence-based because it's never actually been studied. And I'm sitting there fuming, oh, what am I going to say back to this? And so that is a good perspective.
Yeah. Anything else to add to this one, Bryan?
No, man, that's good.
This was a very good conversation. Hopefully we get some good discussion out of it. And just to wrap this up, big shout out to Zach and Josh and the rest of the data-driven strength guys. They do really, really cool, good work, and everyone else who put their efforts into this research. It's been really, really cool, and I'm sure they will only continue to put out further cool work and doing good work in the space of combining being bros, lifting, power lifting, which they do a lot of, and then obviously pushing forward with research and literature as well.
Yeah, no, I co-sign all of that. I love the work that those guys put out, and I'm just so excited that we have people like Milo and Zach and Josh and the rest of that team that are in their early 20s, literally doing this work. I mean, it is insane to me to think about being in my early 20s and having this type of like focus and direction and passion for something. It's set up really well for the future of hypertrophy and strength research.
Yeah, I kind of did forget about that. They're all still so young, which is wild. Kudos to all of them. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week.